you. All right. You all know about PEP 8, the Python style guide documentation, or in my mind, it's like that thing that blocks your PR from getting merged. You know, for a lot of people, PEP 8 is probably the first PEP you ever heard about, and also it might be the only PEP they ever heard about. So, and I think people have the same story on how they get to know about PEP 8. Like maybe your first ever contribution to a project, your first ever code at work, basically the first time you showed your code to someone else, code that actually works. You have the unit test, you even have documentation, and yet it could not be merged because it was not PEP 8 compliant. Like, apparently your orders, your imports must be in a certain order. Your code, the line length should have exactly the right amount of characters, and there must be exactly certain amount of spaces in between your function definitions or classes. Um, and this is how you all first heard of a PEP. And I don't know if you read PEP 8, because the first time I got PEP 8, I I was young and stupid. I read PEP 8 and then I stopped reading after the first paragraph. I was such a noob. PEP 8 says this document gives coding conventions for the Python standard library. So again, I was young and stupid. I argued about this to my coworker, like, why does this matter? If I wasn't contributing to the standard library, like, why does this matter? Um, the Python core developers, they never intended for the community to adopt this. This the community who decided that, well, this is, if the Python core devs have this style guide, let's use it too. Let's hold to the same standard as the standard library. Let's not reinvent the wheel, let's just use it, right? Although in practice I found people like the idea of style guide, but not necessarily with PEP 8 entirely. And I think in the end there's really no standard, and that's another problem I don't really want to discuss right now. But in my mind, PEP 8 is not a good introduction of what PEPs really are. In fact, PEP 8 is a unique type of PEP. Most other PEPs are not like it at all. The only PEP that looks like PEP 8 is PEP 7, the C style guide for Python. But a PEP is not about a style guide. So what is it? This is explained in PEP 1, PEP Purpose and Guidelines. So PEP stands for Python Enhancement Proposal. So this is a design documentation, a proposal, for when you want to make major changes to Python. So if you want to improve Python. So the PEP process for the Python core development team, this is a mechanism for proposing major new features. And during this process, we seek community input about the proposed feature. We try to get consensus from the community. We want to know that the community agrees that this is a good change, that Python will be better with it, and that the community wants this change. So does it mean everything, like each time you want to change Python, and each time you want to contribute, you need to write a PEP? So I think we need to understand just how to contribute, how to make changes to Python, and then from there, which changes would need a PEP. So Python is an open source project, so we have a public issue tracker on GitHub. So everything should start there. You should start by opening an issue to the GitHub repository. So if you have bugs, you discover bugs, you're gonna have to file it in the GitHub repository. And what are bugs? Bugs are in the form of, maybe you get an error when you run Python. Maybe there is something that doesn't work in certain operating system, works on Windows or doesn't work on Windows. maybe things just don't work the way it was documented, or yeah, like there's a mismatch between the documentation and the behavior. Maybe there are some typos. So these kind of changes usually don't really need a PEP. But if the change you want to make involves the change to the Python language itself, like you're gonna change the syntax, the grammar, a new operator, a new symbol, new keywords, then you will need a PEP. So adding a new module to the standard library, you're gonna need a PEP. For example, F strings. Before we add F strings, there's a PEP for that. PEP 498, assignment expressions like the walrus operator, data classes. We got PEPs for those. Async await, there was a PEP. Exception groups, there's a whole bunch of PEPs about typing and the packaging PEPs. But then Python is not just about code, it's a community. And there is community of Python users and contributors and core developers. So there are other aspects in managing community that is not just about writing code changes. So not only we have PEPs for improving the language, we have PEPs for improving the community. So there was a series of PEPs about our governance. So when Guido van Rossum retired from being a BDFL, the Python core developers proposed a different type of governance models. We have a whole bunch of PEPs about that. We now have the steering council model, that the mandate of the steering council, the roles of steering council and core developers are captured in a PEP. Elections of the steering council, we also have PEPs for those, and the candidates for the steering councils, everything's described in a PEP. Improving Python's workflow and infrastructure are also important and impactful to the community and affects everyone who wants to contribute to Python. So, for example, when we need to move our issue tracker, our repository from Mercurial to GitHub, we need to write a PEP about that. We need to explain why we need to make such a move. We need to explain the process of the migration and also why we chose GitHub and not another platform. We also have PEP for the documenting the process of translating Python documentation into different languages other than English. And another important PEP that I think people should know about is the release PEPs. I've had people asking me in the past, like, how can they know when's the next feature, the next Python will come out, or how can they know which Pythons are still being maintained? What's the status of that? Are they in security or in bug fix mode or what? The source of truth for this kind of informations are in the release PEPs. And although now if you read the dev guide, I've linked it there, there is a nice table that shows the status and the timeline of the maintenance of Python. But even the dev guide takes information from the release PEPs. So how does this work? So if you read PEP 1, it will say that the PEP process starts with an idea for Python. I feel that theoretically, yes, you start with an idea, you have an idea, but in practice, I feel like it doesn't really work that way. I don't think you wake up and say, I feel like writing a PEP today, what idea do I come up with? I don't think that's the successful PEPs, in my observation, doesn't work like that. Instead of starting with an idea, you start with a problem. Like you want to do something with Python, but you can't do it yet. So you have a problem, and then you're gonna have to bring up this problem with the core developers, with other contributors, and you don't even need to have a solution yet. Just share your problem, discuss it in the forum where core developers are, and that is the GitHub repository, our Discord forum, or come to the Python Language Summit. That's also a good place to bring up problem that cannot yet be solved in Python. So you're gonna start by discussing your problem, share your experience, and maybe you, during the discussion period, you or someone else might come up with a solution, and maybe this solution turns out you're gonna need a new syntax in Python, or like maybe it just can't be solved by having a third-party Python library. Like it needs a change in the Python language itself. So at that point, you're gonna need to write a PEP. You will be told that, all right, write a PEP, explain this problem and the solution. And if you're not a core developer, you're gonna need to have a core developer to sponsor your PEP, basically to support your idea and your proposal. Then you're gonna start actually writing a PEP and gonna have to continue discussing this problem, championing the idea to the core developers and to other contributors. And you might get pushback and from different people, and this is part of the process. Like this is part of the consensus building process. Like you're gonna have to convince the community that this is a problem that needs to be addressed, that now there is a solution. You propose the solution to the problem, and even though this will cause maintenance burden to Python, overall you need to convince that overall it's worth making this change. This will improve the experience of using Python. So you're gonna have to continue document all of these discussions and questions, clarify your design, and incorporate all of this into the PEP. So your PEP is gonna go through many revisions. Once you're happy with the PEP, like you've completed the design, you've documented all the discussions, and maybe there seems to be a consensus from the community about this PEP. Then you'll submit your PEP to the steering council, and the Python steering council will review and make a pronouncement whether they're gonna accept or reject your PEP. So if you get your PEP accepted, then congratulations, like it's big. So what does it mean when your PEP is accepted? It means that now you actually get to complete the implementation. You get to write the code, your code to fix your problem. The solution to your problem can now be included in Python, and that means the next Python version will have your PEP, the solution to your problem. And once the PEP is finished, that means now there is a new feature in Python. So the thing is, you've wrote lots of documentation in the PEP, but you still need to document this feature in the Python documentation in docs.python.org, because a PEP is really a proposal. It's a proposal documentation. If you want to know how the change got made, yes, you read the PEP. But for the general users who just want to know how to use this new feature, they need to be able to read it in the docs.python.org, and therefore you're gonna need to write more documentation. And the one thing that might not be obvious is that the time spent from the time you bring up this issue, this problem, to the time you start writing the PEP until it gets approved, this takes a long time. This is not overnight, definitely. Like this could take months, could take years, and the time spent, a lot of time is not in the coding itself, but really there's a lot of time spent in getting consensus, discussing this issue to make sure that we get the input from community to make sure that this is indeed a good change for Python. So why am I telling you all of this? Like, why do you need to know about PEP if it's something for the Python standard library? Like, you are a user of Python. You are a community member. You do have a voice in all of this, even though it's the steering council who accept or reject a PEP. Community input is always taken into consideration. Like, remember what PEPs are really for. They're for big changes, like adding new keyword, new syntax, changing to the grammar. Maybe some things got removed from Python, right? So what if this change could end up breaking your code, your product, your third-party library? So the reality is, core developers, we have blind spots. We might not know all the use cases. We might not know how this will affect how you use Python. So we do need you to share your concern or show your support of a PEP. And the best time to bring up your concern, your voice during all of this is during the PEP discussion period, before the pronouncement got made. So one interesting story here is that PEP 563, this is postponed evaluation of annotations. I won't say the detail of what it is, but what was proposed in PEP 563, basically it will hide under the flag like you need to do from future import annotations. So this was approved in 2017 and was accepted that same year. So this was approved, at that time it was Python 3.7, and this was set to become a default behavior starting in Python 3.10, meaning in Python 3.10 we did not need to have that from future anymore. It turns out that PEP 563 in 2021, if accepted, if merged, this will break really popular Python library like Pydantic and Fast API that depends on it. So 3 weeks before we're set to freeze Python 3.10, there was a big commotion about it, like, oh, Fast API will break, lots of people depend on it. Oh. So in the end, with input and feedback from the community, the steering council decided to put this on hold. The change was rolled back, meaning you still need to use the from future import statement. And then PEP 563 was put on hold indefinitely. And one of the reasons is that, when PEP 563 was proposed in 2017, there wasn't even Fast API. So we weren't aware that this would affect such, popular library. So this is the blind spot, and it just shows how important it is for you as users to be aware of changes that's coming. Like, your input does matter to the core devs. And by the way, the solution is for this situation was PEP 649, and after lengthy discussions, actually PEP 649 was just accepted in May, so there's a good story in the end here for Pydantic and Fast API. But really, the key thing is that I really would love for people who just participate in the core Python development, do stay up to date to the PEPs, share your concern or support of the upcoming PEPs. If a PEP will actually cause you trouble, instead of improving of how you use it, share it, but don't just say, oh, I don't like it, I have bad feelings about it. That's not good enough. You're gonna have to explain why it doesn't solve the situation for you, so that we could come up with a better solution. So you should also keep up to date with the Python release schedule, so you know when the next Python's coming up, and test your code against the pre-releases of Python. So before we release Python, there is the alpha version, the beta version, the release candidate. So test your code against those and report issues. And really, the steering council and the core devs are there to hear about your use cases. There might be things we haven't considered before, as I mentioned, we got blind spots. And after all, the mandate of the steering council is to seek consensus. It is the mandate of the steering council to work with you. And again, the purpose of the PEP is really to give information to the Python community. So the PEP is for you. You are the users. You are a member of the community. So as users, as members of the Python community, you too can participate. You can have your voice heard by the Python core devs and the steering council, and so therefore you too can help make Python better. So thank you so much for listening to my pep talk.
Hopefully.